Hi folks, and welcome back to my YouTube channel, and in this video we're going to complete the paint booth. This is actually part number 4 and we're going to install the fan. And here is the fan. I will have an intake fan and an exhaust fan. I will talk more about the fan in a few minutes. To install the fan, we will build a fan box, and that's the first thing we're going to do. We also will install a couple of other elements like a water separator and oil filter, because that's important when you're going to spray, that you don't get any damp or water inside your compressed air, and for sure you don't want to get any oil residue in it or any other small particles in it. And then we'll be talking a little bit about the filters, different filters, a paint filter, a pre-filter, and a cabin filter that we will apply. Unfortunately, my cabin filter hasn't arrived, but that doesn't really matter for this video. And of course, we'll install then the big pipe here, which is going to be the exhaust pipe towards the outside. So let's start with the exhaust system. So we're inside the paint booth, and on my left hand side I have the exhaust area where the exhaust filter will come into, and you'll see that in a few minutes. And on the other side of the booth we have to build this box, this wooden box, which is going to hold the ventilator or the fan to extract all the air from the paint booth. And that is not very hard to build. It's just a box in wood with a fan in it and nothing more than that, and an exhaust pipe on it. But we need to talk a little bit about the fan. The question, of course, is what kind of a fan should you use in your paint booth? Your paint booth has a certain volume, and that volume of air has to be extracted in a certain amount of time. Now, air velocity is another aspect in a paint booth, and it's recommended to have between 0.3 meters per second or 0.6 meters per second airflow in the paint booth. That is about 1 foot to about 2 foot for you American friends or other people that use this the non-metric system. So that's about the recommended airflow in the paint booth, so the air velocity. So by the way, guys, I have a little cheat chart here because I don't really remember cubic meters to cubic feet and all this. I know I can calculate, but I don't just remember it out of my head. Anyhow, so this is what we would like to have. Now, in this paint booth, I have an airflow from the left to the right. So I'm having a horizontal airflow. And other paint booths have a vertical airflow from the ceiling to the floor. But this one that we have built here is a horizontal airflow. And for a horizontal airflow, the calculation is a bit different than for a vertical airflow. So what we need to do is look at one wall and the other wall, and that's where the filter is in. This is the intake filter, that's the exhaust filter, and here we'll place a fan, and here we're going to place a fan. Now, to figure out how fast air needs to move between the two endpoints, so air will flow this way, and we already said ideally between 0.3 and 0.6 meters per second, or 2 feet per second or 1 feet per second, we need to size the fan accordingly. And every fan has a certain capacity. It's not about the size of the propeller, it's about how much or how many cubic meters, how much volume of air can this fan suck out of a room. And I have gone for a fan which is providing 4,000 cubic meters of extraction of air per hour. Now that equates more or less to about 141,000 cubic feet of air that this fan can extract out of this paint booth. Now the question then is that enough? Well, there is a very easy calculation that you can do. All you really need to do is measure the distance, let's call this the width, between the inlet and the outlet filters in your paint booth. Consider the height, and then all what you need to do is multiply the width by the height, multiply that by the ideal airflow that you want to get in your paint booth. And if I do it by 0.3, like in my case, and I'm doing it in meters per second, but you can do it in feet per second. If you do it in feet per second, then of course your dimensions are also in feet. And then you multiply this by 3,600 seconds. And then you're going to get a certain volume. Now, in my case, my paint booth is 3.6 meters and 2.4 meters high. And I multiply it by 0.3 times 3,600. This is going to give me, in my specific case, I need about 9,000 cubic meter of air extraction to reach a velocity of air of 0.3 meters per second or 1 feet per second. So I'm going to need 9,000 cubic meter of air to do this. This equates more or less for you guys in the US to 320,000 cubic feet per hour. So knowing that, my fan is only able to do 4,000, but I need 9,000 cubic meters, or 141,000 cubic feet versus 320,000 cubic feet. I now know that I will never be able to achieve that air velocity. So I might have to add another fan, but I don't think it's necessary because it's okay to be between 0.3 and 0.6. In fact, you could even have 0.7 or 8 or 9. So that is not that critical as such. That is a standard rule for legislation for health and all this and safety in different countries, and in your country that might be different, but where I live they recommend these values. Anyhow, so what that means is that in my case, if I stick to the fan I have, and the fan I showed you already, that I'm gonna have an air velocity of 0.6 meters, because if I do multiply this by 0.6, then you will see I'm near to where I'm supposed to be. So in fact, my final outcome, if I calculate it, will be 0.7 meters per second. That will be what I will achieve with this fan here. All right, so that to me is good enough, and you can calculate your own if you want, and you can settle for less or more. If it turns out in practice that it isn't enough for me, then I will add a fan. I don't think it's going to be necessary. But nevertheless, it's always good to look at that and consider it. So now let's get on and let's start building the fan box. I have put together the framing of the outside fan box. And there's what there is to it, really. I mean, I don't need to show you very much on. And this is the outside of the fan box, so that's outside the paint booth. And that's where the fan will come. And now I'm going to close this up. This is nothing more than a box. And then the big tube for the exhaust will come right here. So let me close that up, and then we continue with the fan. So let's put the second panel up, and I'm closing up the back now with leftovers. I could have used new panels, one big panel for that, but I decided not to because I had so many little leftovers that I might as well use them. I've continued to put the last panel up, and I already did kind of a cutout here where the tube will rest in. And to do so, I've made a template which is the size actually of the tube or the fan, so that will go on here. So now I can put the tube through the wall. I made an opening in the wall, and I can make it rest in this kind of half moon shaped form. And then we'll continue to close up the edges around the tube on the outer wall, and then we'll put the fan in here and connect the tube to the fan. So let me put the tube up and see how that goes. Now in your case that might be very different. It all depends where you will have your exhaust. So that looks good. And I will put a little block underneath because I will have to make it level at the end. But that's not important right now. So this is how it will be. Now obviously I still have to cut out in the next panel the opening for the fan. And that's what I'm going to use this one for. And let me show you how I'm going to do this. To have actually this half moon circle here correctly onto the template. And therefore I will slide back the tube, and the last panel will go on the top, and that's where the fan will be partially in. The fan is also partially in this panel. So I have to make sure that this cutout is matching up to the top panel, and therefore I already have my template made. And all I need to do is just mark the edges, and then I should be good to go. So here's the panel that we have to put on the top of the fan box. I already marked the edges, and now with the template we just created in the back of the box, I just need to align this line, and then I can draw along the edges, and that should be the part that we are going to cut out. And here is the fan, and I think that should fit in just nicely. So I need to drill a hole to feed through the power cable, and this is the power cable for the fan, so I need to feed that into the box. This is the good thing about this flexible cable, which is pre-wired. It's very handy. I placed it on a pedestal so I can now hook up the cabling, and this is the cable, 220 volts with a grounding and a line and a neutral, and I need to connect it up to the actual fan. In your place that could be different, but most of the fans always come with a wiring diagram. What is important to know is that if you're going for a fan, it has to be explosion free, so you shouldn't have any arcing, because if you're going to suck out air from a paint booth, then you're sucking out air and solvents, and that could explode if you had an arcing fan. So let's see if we can get all this done. You might be better off with flex wire, but okay, it is what I have, and that's what I have to work with. There we go. Put the cover up. So let's put the panel in. So let's try out the fan and see if it works, and then we can continue. The fan does what it's supposed to do. It sucks quite nice air out of the boot. I went inside the boot and I checked it out, and it's really great. The next thing we're going to do is to hook up the pipe, the exhaust pipe, and then I will fill up the edges so everything stays in place nicely with some foam. And then I'm going to fill up the paint booth with a smoke gun, and we'll see how long it takes for this fan to extract all the smoke out of the paint booth. Well, and now we'll fill up the gaps with foam. Okay folks, so far so good. The fan is installed, at least the exhaust fan. I already pre-mounted the filter into the opening that we made before. And what I have in here is what we call a paint stop filter. It's a very thick filter with a very fine thread in it. And when paint particles that are airborne travel through it, the paint will be caught on those wires. You buy it by the roll, it's not expensive at all. And you can get the rolls on different sizes depending on your filter size or your opening. And the filter itself is a loose side, which is the light green side, which is the side facing inside the paint booth, and a more smooth, more dense side, that's the back side. That's the one that has to lean against the grill or the grid that we have in the back, so towards the fan. So if you're installing those, don't forget that. So the next thing we're going to do is actually to fill the paint booth with a smoke gun, and then see how long it takes to evacuate the smoke. So guys, I'm going to fill up the paint booth with air. I'm going to fill up the paint booth with smoke, and then we'll see how fast we can evacuate all the smoke. I'm going to start first filling it up with no fans on, and then we'll see how good or how bad it goes. I'm going to move a bit aside because I don't like this smoke too much. It's not dangerous for your health. I'm going to turn it a bit around so we have it in all directions. All right. So let me just go around a bit with this and then try to get the smoke all over the place. All right, so I think that's good enough. Now I'm going to put the fan on and see how fast we can get it out. Of course, the gun is still shooting a bit of air. So this starts to clear up pretty well. I have already a lot of clean air on the intake area, and it's really cleaning up here. So I think this is working pretty well. So I'm quite happy with this result. Oops, there we go. We're getting a bit more smoke coming in. And let's see what happens with the smoke if I produce more smoke. You can see how I get my smoke going into the air filter. And I'm doing this from about 1.5 meters, 2 meters away. So as you can see, it sucks in nicely the smoke. So folks, you've seen so far on how we can extract the smoke in a decent time out of this paint booth, and I was quite happy with that because I really used a very, very dense smoke for that. Now we need to look at something else. It's about the pressure in the paint booth. Do we want to have a paint booth which is using under pressure or over pressure? There are two models. Now an under pressure paint booth is good enough, but it tends to suck in dust and small particles through small openings here and there because the pressure in the booth is less than outside. So as soon as you open up the door, you're going to suck in air which is not filtered. So that is not a good idea. So I'd rather go for a slightly overpressured paint booth. And that means that my air intake has to be a bit more powerful than my exhaust. And I will be doing that by blocking off partitions of the filter so that my exhaust surface is a bit smaller than my intake surface. It's a bit playing back and forth. I may even do it with changing the speed on the fans. Now I can't show you the overpressure yet because I don't even received my intake fan. I'm still waiting for it. It hasn't been delivered yet, but as soon as I have it, I will put it up and I'll show it to you in my first paint job. But anyhow, let me show you what I mean with an under pressure paint booth. So here I have a barometer and you can actually see what the current pressure or air pressure, atmospheric air pressure is. And see where the pressure is. Now I'm going to close the door and see what happens. Now let's see what it does. See how it dropped down a little bit? This is because the booth is now under pressurized. So folks, you've seen how the filters are working. I still have to build the intake box for the intake fan and the filters, but I don't have the fan yet. I don't have the filters yet. They were on order, but they got delayed. But it's exactly the same principle as what you've seen on the exhaust fan. It's the same box, but then you have two filters, a pre-filter in front of the fan and a final filter at the inside of the paint booth so that you have double filtration. That's really all there is to it. And now the last thing to do is to provide some compressed air into the booth. So these are the last parts we're going to install on the spray booth. These are actually water filters and dust filters because you don't want to get any water coming into your spray gun because that would give you a lousy paint job. So this is what we're going to install, not very difficult to do. You have brackets on it, as you can see, and we just mount them on the wall, and there is an airflow marker, so that's what we're going to respect. I'm going to mount this on the outside of the paint booth, and then I will feed a hose through the wall into the paint booth, so we have a fixed hose in the paint booth. So this is it. Air intake goes to the filter, water gets separated, dust gets filtered out and into the paint booth. So here we go. The air hose is in the paint booth. That's the last thing we're going to do. So folks, this is it. This is the end of building your own paint booth, and this was part number 4. We've completed everything except the intake fan box. We still have to build that, but that's the same as the exhaust box you've seen in this video. So nothing special, except that I'm going to use 2 different filters, a pre-filter and then a fine dust particle filter. It's going to go in the inside. And that's it. The rest, you've seen everything there is to be seen. We completed the box. There is one last thing I will have to do here, is to paint the floor. I thought I would have done it earlier, but I haven't. So I still need to paint the floor, put the intake fan box up, and then clean up the outside, paint these doors, paint this wood, you know, all these little things to clean it all up a little bit. But that is not the essence, of course, of building your own paint booth. So I thank you so much for viewing, and I hope you really enjoyed it. And I will see you in my next video. And if you like this video, give me a thumbs up. If you don't, give me a thumbs down. I'm okay with that as well. Bye-bye for now. Bye.